I'm Dr. Alvin Thomas. My work and this show is dedicated to educating, validating, elevating, and celebrating the importance of Black fatherhood. This is the Black Fatherhood Podcast. Be the change you wish to see in the world. It's a phrase that many of us strive towards, but struggle to achieve. Our next guest, however, is fulfilling that goal. In his own words, he is a father, husband, judge, pastor, and a community leader. He is committed to dismantling what he describes as the child welfare to juvenile delinquency to adult prison pipeline, operating not only in Wisconsin, but nationwide. He often talks about the disproportional impact of the justice system on fathers in family court processes and how fathers work towards becoming more aware and empowered regarding their position and rights in the family court. And he comes to it all from a position of experience and growth. Our guest today is the Honorable Reverend Judge Everett Mitchell. Judge Mitchell is the presiding judge of the Juvenile Division in Dane County. His rotation includes juvenile and child welfare, family, and civil cases. He is also senior pastor of the Christ the Solid Rock. He is also adjunct professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison's Law School, teaching classes on race, racism, and the law and juvenile justice administration. Thank you so much for joining us today, Judge Mitchell, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thomas. Thank you so much for having us. Morehouse brothers, Morehouse men in conversation today, huh?
Morehouse on the docket.
Yeah.
You've had an incredible life journey that has taken you from adversity, abuse, and being what you described as functionally illiterate as a child to where you are today on the judge's bench. Can you share a little bit about your story with us?
Yeah, I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, and again, thank you for inviting me to be able to do that, to have this conversation with you. And I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, and had my mom, who recently passed last year, married a guy when I was about 6 years old, and he was just an abuser, sexual, physical abuser, and he did that for a number of years in our family, for actually 12 years. And so, after fighting years, trying to get some help from that, about the age of 18 years old was when CPS came in and, broke up the family so that we could kind of get some relief and some help. But by the time I endured all those years, man, I was functionally illiterate, and some people don't quite get, you can live and still be functionally illiterate. You can, just because you can't see and read everything doesn't mean you don't read enough just to be able to understand how to survive. So I was good at math, good at chemistry. And so those things helped me out till I got to my small school called Jarvis Christian College. And that's when I realized I couldn't read. And I had two teachers, Miss Daisy Wilson, Miss Margaret Bell, who taught me how to read. And, it was like they unlocked the whole world to me at that time. And I went from there to, eventually transferring to Morehouse and graduated with a degree in mathematics and religion, and then going over to Princeton Theological Seminary and get my 2 master's degrees from there, and then eventually making my way to the University of Wisconsin-Madison Law School and earning my Juris Doctorate there.
I like how you were able to you definitely are a judge, very systematically lay out that journey for us without a ton of meandering. But as you were talking about your degrees and talking about Morehouse, Sale Hall and Dansbury just kind of popped into my mind because those would be your spaces on campus.
Yeah, I started out in Mays, and then, my journey to Morehouse was always complex because I never had the money to be there. And I remember my last semester in Morehouse, they changed the policies that you had to pay your tuition up front. And I didn't have any money. I never had the money. I always paid it off. They know I did that. And so they were like, well, if you don't have the money to be at Morehouse, maybe you should go back to Texas and save it. And I didn't have any money. I said, y'all know I don't have no money. We do this every semester. So I said, you know what, take all the money to be in my tuition and I'll just be homeless. And that's what they did. I ended up moving out and staying in my car for a little bit. And then a friend of mine that I met at Jarvis was happened to be a youth pastor over at Cascade United Methodist Church with Dr. Kimbrough. And Dr. Kimbrough was like, son, I don't want you to be homeless. We got this parsonage. You can stay in there with the youth pastors. And that's what I did. I slept on a pallet. And if people don't know what a pallet is, you ain't never been that poor. But
Exactly.
I slept on a pallet to finish my last semester at Morehouse because I didn't have a bed because I'd always lived in dormitories. So I slept on a pallet and, and then graduated the top ranking religious senior in my department that year. But, so no, I don't have memories of like dormitories and all that other
Right,
stuff because
right.
I was always hustling 2 or 3 jobs just to, make ends meet so I could at least pay that tuition down.
I swear we could sit and talk about that different Morehouse experience, because mine was not too far from yours.
Oh, wonderful.
With a similar outcome as yours. I ended up the top psychology major for that year.
Wonderful.
And out of adversity comes this success.
Yeah.
How and why did you become a judge and a reverend? And do you see those two roles intersecting each other, complementing, not complementing?
Yeah, I was called to ministry at the age of 15 years old. So I started preaching fairly young, in my 10th grade year. I still remember my first sermon, God's grace and mercy is sufficient, that I preached at 15. And my voice hadn't even deepened yet. It hadn't changed yet. I still remember being a little bit falsetto in my speaking, but
Are there any recordings of that?
no, no. And I'm glad there's not. I'm glad there's not.
I'd like to hear that.
And so yeah, and so I'd always, my initial plan was always to go into a church and to work into a church. And then once I finished seminary, doors didn't open, and then I came to Madison, couldn't find a job in Madison, and started doing prison reentry work. And this lady by the name Mary Kay Baum, she was a pastor and a lawyer, and she talked about the combination of being able to go to law school and fight for people and, fight for people who can't fight for themselves. And she really put the bug in my ear. I'm 28 years old, 29. I hadn't even thought about law school. I don't know any lawyers in my family. There's none of this. And so it was just the idea that I had all these wonderful people that I was helping who were coming out of prison, trying to get jobs and housing and employment and treatment. And they would find all these spaces of discrimination. And I said, and this was my mind. My mind is telling me, well, if you had a law degree, they wouldn't treat your clients like this. So I went to law school just to be able to sue people, to protect people's rights. And it turned out that I ended up going through law school, loved the experience, ended up homeless again as a single father while I was in law school. And my 2-year-old baby and I just, we grew up together as I did my law school classes. Graduated, became prosecutor, and then just saw the need to have more diverse judicial representation in our community. And because I had worked so hard in the community and had, led marches around Black Lives Matter and brought people together, brought this community together, that when I decided to run, I had a whole community willing to support, my ability to become a judge. And, I like to think that I've returned back to them that similar sense of greatness and my commitment to them as well.
I get this image of you homeless with your little child and determined, like you were at Morehouse, to get through and to make the best out of this. And thinking of that as the image of a number of other Black fathers who may not necessarily be going to law school, but might be in other spaces where they're facing significant challenges with their children or with their child. What did the landscape for Black men and fathers look like when you started your work? And has that changed at all?
I think that is still a challenge. I really don't think that it really has changed much. I still think, when it comes to being a Black father, the broader dominant narratives that support Black men engaging their children is still very negative. I think it's still rooted in a very racist, patriarchal definition that still extends from what I call the welfare state of our families, right? Keeping the black men out of the home so that the women could be able to receive welfare and, federal benefits. And that push away from this notion of men being involved and being essential to this notion that black men are caricatures or easily, manipulated or, not emotionally available or, all these different things that still succumb, I think, to the notions of what does it mean to be a father. And I don't know if the landscape, definitely as a judge, I definitely don't see the landscape has shifted, especially when you come inside the system and when you're trying to facilitate conversations about how black fathers can be instrumental in the lives of their children. Both the internal ways that black men see themselves, but also how the system and children and their partners see them as well.
So, is there anything that can be done then to challenge and change these perceptions to kind of ensure that there's fair treatment of fathers in the family court?
Well, I think one is, we have to share our stories. I think, when I get around black fathers, I try to, like I think I told you before, like trying to have these small conversations in barbershops and churches to teach black fathers about the ways in which the laws are written to really, really to exclude the development of how different family systems look, because the family code is written based on a kind of Eurocentric model of marriage. And that model of marriage is what still defines how the presumptions of who should be involved in that child's life, or more importantly, the presumption that every person should have equal time with their child. That presumption is not tied to you as a biological father. It's only tied to you if you are married in the institution itself. So trying to educate not only fathers as to why is it that I seem like I'm fighting to be with my child, is to help them understand, well, the presumption is not there for you. So we have to reorganize the ways in which you present your arguments, because you're not presumed to have that time. And so when you think about time for your child, you can't think of it in this, my child, I've been there. You have to think about it in terms of overnight visits. How many overnights do you have throughout the year? And they're like, but I take care of my child. I was like, that's not the question. How many overnights do you have with your child? That is now your presumption. And you have to begin to participate in the process. And that's not a conversation we have anywhere. That's not a conversation we have in churches and all these other spaces where individuals are trying to figure this out. But that's the legal standard that gets you into a conversation about placement and custody rights. And, how do you work with the mother of your child or children? How do you balance all multiple children if you have multiple children with multiple women, or if you just have multiple children with one woman? What does that look like? And I think that is a conversation that to me, is still ripe for us to dissect.
Interesting that you mentioned that. We had a conversation recently with Dr. David Pate, who does a ton of work on child policy and family policy, and talking about some of the supports that are needed for men. And one of the things, really illuminating points that he kind of unearthed for us, was that there was not the presumption of fatherhood for fathers, that by its very nature, if a mother comes in with a child, it's assumed that that's her child because the child came from her. But a man, unless he is married and living with the mother, is not presumed to be the father, and he has to prove his paternity. And it sounds like you're saying a very similar thing, that it's not enough to just say that I spend time with my child. You have to prove that paternity as well.
Yeah, you definitely have to. Yeah, you're right. Legally, you have to prove through a paternity test that you are the father of that child. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but yeah.
So I know Dr. Pate was talking about how some of the policy spaces are now trying to think, or are being forced to think about how they're engaging fathers. How can family courts, so some of the work is definitely on the fathers, but then thinking about how to put some of that work on the systems. How can the family courts ensure that fathers are granted equal rights and responsibilities in custody and visitation decisions?
Well, I think once I think it is as simple as once paternity is established. Now,
Hmm.
I will say that sometimes there are two pieces of the system that can hurt the process.
Hmm.
One is that not all fathers actually know that they have children.
Mm. Mm.
Right. I've actually had cases where there is, father comes in later and finds out that, oh, that's my child. Like, I didn't know that, because, and then later on, I've even had fake people show up at a paternity test just to be able to give very different DNA. And so by the time we find out that this child is not that child, but another person's child, years have passed. And what is the
Wow.
remedy for that? So the key is, when the system itself is set up to verify. So the father has to make sure that he or she is taking the initiative to, in those relationships, to make sure that they are connecting on that paternity test. That paternity test triggers a whole different sets of rights. The main right is child support, but the second right is a bundle of rights that come along with being a parent, which are custodial rights, placement rights. Now, the presumption is not there, but the rights are there once paternity is established. And so the statute is very clear that these bundle of rights, the ability to know about medical and educational custodial decisions, attached to the father. And it's up to the father to be able to now demonstrate that he is in position to provide custody and a place to live, and can be there at school, and can be there to do the custodial things, as well as provide a safe place for the placement to occur as well.
I love that the idea that there's this bundle of rights that people should have access to and may not have access to out of ignorance, not
Yes.
knowing that those rights are theirs. Are there any kinds of policies that the family courts you think should be implementing to encourage this meaningful father involvement, even maybe post separation or divorce?
Yeah, I think the same presumption. I think the presumption is what I really would like to have. The presumption that comes with marriage should be the presumption that comes with paternity. So that once paternity is established, then that presumption of equal time and equal, and the other part of the presumption is not only just equal time, but that the other parent cannot interfere with the equal time of another parent, right? So that interference language
Right.
protects marriage. It does not protect you from paternity. So that if we're talking about a policy shift, I want that presumption that comes along with the fact that you were married and now you're getting divorced to also come with paternity, so that men are not fighting to prove that they are good fathers. It is presumed that they can be good fathers unless some other thing pops up that demonstrates to the contrary. But having that presumption means that nobody can interfere with your time. I mean, you can't, it is established that no, they can't just move out the state. They can't just take him. They just can't tell you, no, you can't go to school. You can't do this. No, this is my time and you cannot interfere with my time. And if you are, there are legal remedies to impact the change of that time.
So I know that there'll probably be people sending me emails very soon after this airs to see things like, what about those fathers who are abusing children? What about persons who are involved in domestic violence? Are you suggesting that we should be giving these people 50-50 custody and making it so easy for them to get access to their victims? What would you say to that?
Obviously, you don't grant, just like wouldn't grant a father who was married time with children who abused their children. You wouldn't grant that to a non-custodial parent as well. And just because, and I think the stories that people always give out is like, well, what about someone who's abused this, or what about And I would say to them, the majority of fathers who are in court fighting for their children are not the ones who abuse their children, are not the ones who abuse their partners. If they're in court fighting for their children, it is not because of those things. They are not the ones who are doing that. So to kind of lump them into the whole mix is really to kind of continue this perpetuation of this black male image that white society has demonized, to try to say this is nothing but a black buck who's out of control and doesn't take care of their children. That's not the case. There's so many men, especially black men, who are moving into this common era of wanting to be involved in their children's lives, but of finding so many different structures that if I don't coalesce around what this biological mother may want, then I find myself always fighting against the system. And I share with brothers my story. I was a single dad, in court fighting for my daughter, fighting for the right to be in her life. And I was married. And and even when my ex took my daughter and fled the state, and I'm having to go across states to go find my daughter, police didn't help. Police here wouldn't help. And I'm in another state, scared that I'm about to get turned up in another her house trying to find my daughter. And if I hadn't had if I didn't have my legal degree, I don't know if I would have been able to navigate
Right.
two different state statute laws related to family and custody, but I was able to, and that allowed for me to be able to get my daughter, get her back into her rhythm and her system. But it is a very vulnerable space to be in when all of these narratives. And I even had a police tell me like, well, maybe she's took her for a good reason. And I'm like, this is my daughter, man. And I said to him, I said, man, if I was a black man, if she was coming up saying this, and this black man took this child out of the state,
Different story.
man, it'd be 911. Y'all be out there trying to get me. I said, but I flipped the script, and I'm here arguing for you to get my child back. And what I get out of this is maybe there's a reason why she takes it. I said, no, that's my child. I have custody. I have placement. She can't just take her and not bring her back. And man, so that's what I share with brothers. I say, you have to, as long as you are fighting and being thoughtful in your response to your partner, your ex-partner, court systems are based on evidence, and you can always have the opportunity to get your message heard, but you can't get baited, because if you get baited into giving an emotional, aggressive, negative response, that image will attach itself to your body almost for the duration of their case.
Did you have a positive male role model growing up? And if you could tell us a little bit about him.
I would say that, I didn't grow up with a father, and so that was always a big hole in my heart. But I always, I would say that I pulled together many different images of black men throughout my life, and white men, right, who helped me understand what it means to be a father. From my cousin, Bishop Kenneth Spears, been there in my life, to my mentor, Patrick Paul Wheelock, computer guy, white guy, but I loved how, and I had images growing up in TV, so I would watch, A Different World, or Trading, A Different World. And what's my other show about Carl? He was in Chicago. Family Matters. Yep. Family Matters. Yep. That's what it was. And I just love the interactions, right? So I would always in my mind say, that's the kind of dad I want to be, funny and laughable and consistent and dedicated and loving. And so when I couldn't get the physical presence of that, I turned to virtual to kind of help cobble together the experience that I wanted to give to my children over time.
So as we close the conversation, I have just one last question for you, and that is, when you combine your personal experiences with your father figures and your work in the family court, what have you learned about fatherhood and parenting when it comes to your own children, and what would you offer to men out there?
I would offer to men, one, therapy helps. Be proactive in learning good models of fatherhood. Do not use physical discipline or violence on your children. That love is a greater force than fear, and that consistency in love is the most powerful weapon that you could ever have. Don't be distracted by relationships with the biological mother of your children, because this is not about them, it is about your child. Everything else is a distraction. And when you have your children, don't be Santa Claus, be a dad, which means sometimes you got to tell them the hard stuff that they don't want to hear, but you tell them in love and you hold them in love. And then lastly is be affectionate, be emotionally available. So don't be the kind of all these walls and bricks and hard. No, hug your sons, kiss your sons, hug your daughters, love on them, cuddle with them, embrace them, give them a sense of assurance and protection in the world. That's what I would give and I offer to, dads. And I think, the court system, and the system partners, they may not always see that, but it's important that you have a narrative that you can be able to convey that this is who I am and this is who I'm trying to be. And then remember, everything is about the overnights. You know, get your apartment right, get your kids' rooms right. You know, don't buy them Jordans. Don't, you know, if you're gonna spend money on making sure your kids have a room in your house that's really nice and set up just for them. And that's where you spend your investment in that time, and then set them up an educational fund so you can demonstrate to the court, like, not only am I thinking about what I need for my children now, I'm planning for their long-term success in the future. So it just shifting the mindset a little bit around what fatherhood can be, but also shifting the mindset of giving fathers the permission, especially black fathers, the permission to be vulnerable enough to love a new generation. I even created a little video that's been playing around the city with the DA here to talk about don't hit your children, how we can deal with fatherly discipline differently. And it's just amazing that people will respond to me. He was like, man, I didn't even know that was possible, that you don't have to hit your kids in order to discipline them. I'm like, no, you don't. I've never done it to my children, and my children still listen, and they still will learn. And they, you know, it takes a little creativity, but you don't want to put that in them, because if I hit my daughter, am I planting a seed that she believes love looks like this? Or if I hit my son, I don't want him to fear me. I want him to respect me. And respect is the model of what I think we want to be able to return to another generation. And I'll say this last thing: what I teach fathers is this: you're not affecting your children now. You're affecting, not only now, you're affecting the generations to come through them. So think of your love and your actions as impacting your great-grandchildren. If you think like that, you're not thinking in terms of, well, this moment where I'm frustrated with this situation. You're saying, no, my great-grandchildren will know what love is. And they may not even meet me.
Exactly.
But they will understand the residue of my actions, because they would have been given a different set of values to be able to live from.
Thank you so much. I love how you peppered this with gems throughout, and then you emptied the bag at the end. I really appreciate it. Judge Mitchell, it was a great conversation, and look forward to talking with you again sometime soon.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Thomas. Morehouse, man. That's what we do.
That's what we do. Exactly.
That's what we do.
You've been listening to the Black Fatherhood Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Alvin Thomas. I'm a clinical psychologist, researcher, and the director of the TriLab at the University of Wisconsin-Madison's School of Human Ecology. Original music for our series was composed and performed by Micaiah De Silva. Our series producer is Joe Ruby. The podcast is supported by the School of Human Ecology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And you can follow me on Twitter at Dr_AT758. That's Dr_AT758. And on the web at thomaslab.humanecology.wisc.edu. Make sure to subscribe to the Black Fatherhood Podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts.